Students may access Arts Edge on the internet at this address for 2 weeks after the program with questions for the artists.
Welcome to another program in the Performing Arts series produced by the Prince William County Schools, Virginia, and the John F. Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts. My name is Jack Carr. Today's program is entitled Understanding Shakespeare, Hamlet. A new production of Hamlet is scheduled for the Kennedy Center next month. Produced by Great Britain's Royal Shakespeare Company, this Hamlet was a major success of last season's Stratford-upon-Avon season. An important aspect of the Royal Shakespeare Company's effort to make Shakespeare's plays available to the widest possible audience is the work of the company's education department. And with me today is Wendy Greenhall, director of that department, who will share some insights about how the Royal Shakespeare Company produces Shakespeare and about the new production of Hamlet. Thank you for being with us today, Wendy.
It's a pleasure.
And joining us in the studio today are students from Hylton High School here in Prince William County, Virginia. Thank you all for coming as well. Wendy, it seems to me that one of the things we might do is put what we talk about today in some context with regard to the Royal Shakespeare Company. What is it? And what's its purpose?
It's one of the world's largest arts organisations. It employs about 700 people. We're based in Stratford-upon-Avon, quite a small town in the middle of England, on the river. My office is a stone's throw from where Shakespeare almost certainly went to school, and another stone's throw from where he was born. And we're there to work on all the plays, to actually work through the whole canon. We work according to a royal charter from the Queen, and that's our job, to keep Shakespeare alive, but alive on stage, alive new and fresh each year for everyone. And what this means is that we work through all the plays, so the most popular plays will get performed about every 3 or 4 years. So you'll very regularly see Twelfth Night, Midsummer Night's Dream, Romeo and Juliet. And we try to bring within the compass of the company increasingly fresh and new perspectives. So we'll have a fixed group of actors and directors who regularly come back, but also a lot of young new talent to revivify us, to challenge us really, and to take that really new look at what Shakespeare means and can mean today. So our production of Hamlet, for instance, is directed by Matthew Warchus, who I think is still not yet 30. He's a very exciting new director. He directs a lot of Shakespeare, but also other plays. He's done a very successful production of Art in London that I think is coming to New York as well. And he took a very new look at this play, which we've all been very excited about.
Excellent. Well, it's particularly good that you're here because yesterday was Shakespeare's 434th birthday.
That's right, and we had a cake.
We had a cake, we did.
To celebrate his birthday.
It was good cake, too.
It was great. It was death by chocolate for Shakespeare.
Wendy, this is not the first time that the RSC, which is what the Royal Shakespeare Company is broadly called, it's not the first time they've come to the United States, is it?
No, we've been coming for many years, off and on, when we could. when we were invited, when there was money available. Obviously touring is a very complicated and expensive business. But then our artistic director, Adrian Noble, felt that he wanted this relationship with the States, who after all also feel that they own Shakespeare and have a great tradition of study and performance of Shakespeare. Adrian felt that we wanted to cement that relationship. So it's now our wish that we would be able to come every second year. Obviously, there are still those logistical and financial challenges to making that wish come true, but that is our intention. And we came 2 years ago to Washington and other cities in the States, and we brought our production of A Midsummer Night's Dream.
For which we did one of these programs.
We did, yes. That's right, yes, I remember. A lot of actors came out and spoke to you about it. And later this year, we're coming not just with one production, but with 4. And we're going to New York and then coming to the Kennedy Center with Hamlet, with Cymbeline, a very interesting later play, with Everyman, a marvelously interesting modern evocation of that medieval play. And we're bringing those. And also Henry VIII, which is rarely performed, and it's a very strong production with excellent actors, as is Hamlet. So rather an interesting range of 4 productions coming to Washington in early June through to early July.
Excellent. Now, tell us, as Director of Education in that office that is only a stone throw from where Shakespeare wandered, what is it that you do?
Yes, everybody asks us that, and it's a long question. In part, as people's eyes glaze over. But it is an immensely varied job. Really what we're there for is to provide a bridge between our actual and potential audiences and the work on the stage. And that bridge is created in whatever way it needs to be created. So we do a lot of work, for example, in our auditoria before matinees, sometimes before Saturday performances for the general public, where we, perhaps for an hour before the curtain goes up, or an hour and a half, we bring together an interesting group of actors, stage management, prop makers, lighting technicians, and we give a kind of demonstration of whatever has been particularly interesting in the rehearsal process. So if it's a show with fantastic lighting that's really intrinsic to the atmosphere and the impact of the play, then we would base that pre-performance presentation on lighting. If it's a show where actors have used an enormous number of personal props, perhaps to create their character, as is often the case, then we'll have actors with the prop makers, and we'll look at those props and how they've been used, and particularly how actors developed the use of those props during rehearsal in creating their character. If it's a show with a lot of fights, we'll perhaps show the audience the kind of fight warm-up and rehearsal that actors do immediately before they go into the show. So whatever we do is based on what's been important and interesting in rehearsal, and it's there to act as an appetite whetter, as a kind of hors d'oeuvre to seeing the show, and to break down the barriers between audience and what happens on the stage. Because of course it would be naive to pretend that everybody in Britain or everybody around the world can come to the Royal Shakespeare Theatre and walk through its doors and feel completely relaxed in our auditorium. They don't, all of them. It is quite a special place. People often have travelled long distances, and sometimes they've paid quite a lot of money for their seat. So that can both make the experience seem very special, which is a good thing, but it can also make some people, especially perhaps young people or people of any age who are coming for the first time, feel just a little bit intimidated, and after all, this is Shakespeare. So we want to try and really welcome them. We want to try and convey some of our excitement about doing the plays to them, make them relax and ready to enjoy the production. So we do a big programme in our auditoria. We make television programmes sometimes and radio programmes about Shakespeare and about the theatre. I'm involved in a long series for the World Service of the BBC this year, and also in making some telly shows. We do books and publications, and we do a lot of training with teachers. And we also do projects, special community-based projects. We might do a production, we might do a series of workshops, we might do some writers' workshops, because after all, Shakespeare was a great writer. So we do a very wide range of things all over Britain and beyond. I was working in Gibraltar immediately before coming to Washington. I was working with students and teachers in Gibraltar. So it's a very varied job, but really we're there to set up interesting acts of communication that will give information, entertainment and pleasure, really, in Shakespeare on stage.
Well, now you lead me to a question that I hear once in a while. It doesn't matter how old people are, but every once in a while somebody will say to me, well, what's the big deal with Shakespeare? Why should we read Shakespeare? Why should we see these things? They're over 400 years old.
Yes, and why should Hollywood be still wanting to make films of them with such great success? Yes, it is a question that's often asked, and it's asked in England and other places as well. I mean, obviously we're biased. Obviously we don't spend our lives in Stratford working on Shakespeare if we don't think that there's something very rich there. But for us, and I think for most people who are introduced in a very lively way to Shakespeare, there is just incredible richness of human experience. That the depth and complexity of emotion, of longing, of questioning that you get in the characters, in Hamlet, in a comedy, in a wonderful female character like Rosalind, who has such wisdom and such wit about life, about love, about people, that there is just an enormous richness of understanding and questioning, as I've said, about human life. There is also amazing variety, that the plays seem to be about one thing, and then there'll be something really subversive and surprising. So in As You Like It Again, you've got the marvellous sweep of the story, a complicated love story, people learning more and more how to love, how to make a good marriage, how to be true to other people in friendship and in love. And the play goes smoothly and wonderfully and comically on towards the end. But then just at the end, there's that fabulously interesting character of Jaques, the loner, the philosopher, the cynic, the skeptic, who looks at all these couples being married and then says, and I'm going off on my own into a hermit's cave just to think and to meditate. And he's a subversive. He's the grit in the oyster, if you like, who just makes us think in a new way and even more deeply about human life. And that's very typical. And Shakespeare also deals with political ideas. There are a lot of plays about what makes a good leader. Julius Caesar, for instance, that many American students will know, asks that question: how do you control a strong leader so that he doesn't become a tyrant? And if he does become a tyrant, is it ever justifiable to get rid of him, even if that means actually killing him? So that play raises a huge and completely relevant political issue.
Particularly since we've just experienced the death of Pol Pot.
Absolutely.
And we're not really
yes.
sure how they got rid of him.
No, exactly. Maybe that was, in fact, a Julius Caesar scenario. We don't know. So I think there's enormous moral, psychological, and emotional richness that is exciting and engaging for people. There is also wonderful variety and, of course, the pleasure of the language, which swoops over all those issues with such immense articulacy. And I think that's exciting. And I think that's why it's exciting also for students and actors to work on the plays. It gives you a kind of a tremendous high because you become so articulate about yourself and what you want.
Yeah. Do you know, in the same way that the question is raised, why Shakespeare at all, it's perfectly reasonable for some people to ask the question in light of what's coming to the Kennedy Center soon, why Hamlet? Why is this play still regarded by many people as Shakespeare's most significant play? And I thought maybe what we could do is look at a very brief clip by Alex Jennings, who's playing Hamlet, and let's hear what he says, and then let's see what you and people in our audience think about that. Sure. Why Hamlet?
Hamlet is an extraordinary play. Here we are, still doing it 400 and however many years it is after it was written. It's not just about a prince in Denmark. If it was just about that, we wouldn't be doing it. But the words that we're given to say touch everybody, I think. There's something about the play that strikes up resonances in anybody's life.
Resonances?
Yes, it's a word we often say about Shakespeare, and I suppose the question is, what does that mean, and which resonances? It always seems to me that Hamlet is extraordinarily modern, that his dilemma, which is, do I take action or not, and how do I do it, and when do I do it? And he seems so overwhelmed by the enormity of what's happened, by, if you like, the reasons that should propel him into action, that he gets sort of stuck in being overwhelmed. And I think that for me anyhow is a very modern kind of situation, that we have so much knowledge now, we have so much psychological insight into what makes us tick and what makes other people tick. We can question and to some extent understand motivation at a very deep and complex level, and that can often paralyse us, and we can often feel in the complexity of the modern world that action is rather useless as well. So we can be quite good, like Hamlet, at analysing and understanding, and not so good at taking action. And I think that's interesting and quite contemporary. And I also think that the other great sort of issue in the play, which is parents and children. I mean, Hamlet has to, well, it's inescapable to him that his mother has suddenly acted like a completely autonomous being, and of course he doesn't approve. She's made a very hasty marriage with her own brother-in-law. He thinks of it as an incestuous marriage. It upsets him deeply. And even leaving that aside, the actual nature of the marriage, that it was to somebody so close to her, the fact that she's done something that she didn't ask his opinion, I think that's quite an issue, that as children grow up and become adolescent, they often don't like their parents taking independent action and sorting their own lives out. So there's a real tension between mother and son. And of course, because there is that accusation from Hamlet that she is being incestuous, is he jealous? I mean, what exactly is going on in the psychosexual dynamic between a son and a mother? And I think that's very interesting and engaging for a modern audience, too.
I'm wondering if people in our audience here today who are familiar with the play see resonances in their own lives. Anybody see? Yes.
I have a quick question for you, actually. In American schools, we read Hamlet or Macbeth, Julius Caesar, Romeo and Juliet, all very depressing. Do you think it's a mistake that we don't read any comedies?
Yes, I do. I think the comedies are absolutely wonderful. But I thought you often did The Dream, I think.
Midsummer Night's Dream.
Midsummer Night's Dream. Yeah.
We haven't.
Not so often.
In this high school
no.
At all.
Well, yes, I do think it's a shame if you only read, as you say.
He's very depressing.
Yes.
Everybody dies all the time. That's all there is.
Yes. I mean, I think they're more than just depressing, but I know exactly what you mean. Yes, I think it is a mistake not to do the comedies, because I think that the comedies encapsulate not in the same way, but they also encapsulate a huge sweep of human experience. I mean, they're often not only about love and how people get ready for marriage, for the person they're probably going to spend their life with, for that deep relationship, but they're also about friendship. I mean, there's an awful lot in the comedies about what does it mean to be a good friend, and what happens if it looks as if that friendship's been betrayed? How does it get mended? There is also tremendous wit and comedy, and there is a great sweep of characters. So you often get a very warm picture of companionship. There's often a group of servants or retainers of some kind who show things like loyalty and a very kind of rough comic knockabout capacity for friendship and affection for other people. So I think there is a great slice of life that's in the comedies that is entertaining, that's warm-hearted, that's funny, as well as themes of love and friendship, and of course great stories as well. and a new kind of delight in the language, that often it's language just for fun. And I think they are as true to life and really all as deep philosophically as almost, I would say, as the tragedies are. So yeah, I think you should tell your teachers that you should read some comedies.
Wendy, I want to take you back to Hamlet, though, for a minute, and I realized that we didn't do something that we should have done, which is, for the benefit of people who haven't seen it, read it, or haven't for a long time, maybe we should have a little synopsis, and that might help with resonances.
Yes, perhaps it will. Well, it's set in Denmark, but it's not set in any particular time. It's not specifically a historical play. It's set at a crisis point in the state, in that the old king, called Hamlet, has died, and he's been replaced not by his son, who's young Hamlet, Prince Hamlet, but by his brother Claudius. Old Hamlet's wife, Gertrude, has married Claudius, her brother-in-law, very fast. And the play opens when young Hamlet is back from university and is trying to come to terms with his father's death and his mother's, what he describes as o'erhasty, too quick, marriage. And he is still deeply in mourning and deeply shocked by the events. And then suddenly he has an experience of seeing his father's ghost. And his father tells him that, in fact, Claudius, his own brother, killed him. And that's how he's taken the crown. And the rest of the play is an unfolding, really, of how young Hamlet tries to, first of all, prevent his mother from being close to her husband. Very specifically, he doesn't want her to go and sleep with her husband. He doesn't want her to, if you like, to inhabit the full marriage relationship, because he finds it very repellent, because his uncle is now not only his mother's new husband, but also a murderer in Hamlet's eyes. And he also tries to sort out what he's going to do about this horrendous knowledge that he's been given. And the other strand in the play is that he was in love with Ophelia, the daughter of a councillor, Polonius, a politician, a courtier, who is very important to Claudius. And because he's been so revolted by his mother's marriage, he turns away from Ophelia, but also, I think, feels that he is a marked man, because he has to somehow take revenge. He has to deal with the knowledge that the ghost has given him. So he just can't continue a normal, young, loving relationship with Ophelia. And Ophelia is so shocked by this that, in fact, she goes mad and is drowned. And eventually, Hamlet misses the moments for action. And at the end of the play, because Claudius has realised that there's something the matter with Hamlet, and has in fact tried in his own turn to get Hamlet to, first of all, to go away. He's sent to England, which is a good place to send people when you want to get rid of them. And also, he then actually lays a plot to try and trap Hamlet. And it all ends with a duel between Hamlet and Ophelia's brother, Laertes, because Hamlet has inadvertently killed Polonius en route. And it's quite complicated. Claudius has put poison on the swords, and everybody ends up dead, really. So, I mean, the narrative is in some ways quite simple, but it's really a play about whether or not he should take action and how and when he should do it so that it's effective. What does it mean to take revenge? That's what really it's about.
So, how does that have anything to do with you and me and Wendy?
Well,
yeah.
I have a question. You said earlier about how the Royal Shakespeare Company is trying to find new ways to bring audience members back. Well, these stories have been told for 400 years. What keeps it new? What keeps it unique?
Yeah, well, I could talk very specifically about this production of Hamlet, because when Matthew Warchus, the director, was beginning work on the play, it was about the time that Kenneth Branagh had brought out his film. I don't know if any of you have seen that, have you? No. No?
Some.
Yes. Well, it's very long. It's nearly 4 hours. It's the full text. And it's done in a very traditional way. So Matthew thought, well, there it is. It's being shown all around the world. If anyone wants to see the full Hamlet in a traditional way, they can go and see the film. This is wonderful because it releases me, Matthew, to do something very much my own. And he's been extremely bold, and it's been quite controversial. He's cut the play. So, in fact, the performance only lasts about 2 hours, 40 minutes, which is, and normally you would expect to be there for nearly 4 hours. And he's cut the political framing to the play, which is there is in the full text another dimension which I didn't mention in the synopsis, which is that Norway, the power, the neighbouring power, is marching towards Denmark, and the young leader there, the young son there, Fortinbras, has his eye on Denmark, and it's quite a complex political framing. And Fortinbras comes at the end as well. And Matthew has completely cut that away, and he's in order to focus on a set of family relationships and a family tragedy, and to really highlight them. And to some extent, he's changed the order of some scenes, actually, slightly. So he's really played fast and loose with the text. And some critics have thought this was wonderful because it has made us look at this play in a very new way. We really have felt for and with Hamlet. And we've been extremely exercised by his relationship with his mother. And it's a kind of marvellous clarity and intimacy which it gives the play. But at the same time, there are other people who've said, but this isn't Hamlet. I think what I would say is that the theatre is always about doing something new, that the text will be there forever. Nothing stops a director in 5 years' time coming back and doing the full text again. No, we haven't destroyed Shakespeare. We've just been, as we should, in my view, be theatre artists mining these plays for what we want to say and what it means to us now. And so this is a very fresh interpretation.
Quickly, with regard to what you've just said, help us understand how this interpretation brings it closer to us with regard to time.
Yes, well, it's in modern dress, and as you might see perhaps on a clip that we're going to see, Hamlet has a very modern weapon with him, because one of the great issues for Hamlet is, does he take action against his uncle because of what he knows, or does he simply, in despair, kill himself because life has become so awful for him?
So it is essentially 20th century.
It's 20th century and right up to date in setting.
Okay, good. I think we have another comment or question in the group. Do we?
Yes. Earlier you said that there were the actions of the parents in the play, the Queen. You said they affect the children, and I find there's a connection between our modern world, because often we see young kids become extremely violent. There's cases where they shoot other kids, and the parents are often blamed for it. Do you see a connection between Hamlet's world and our modern world, where kids are not rationalizing things as well and seem to be more violent as Hamlet becomes?
Yes, I do, in a very fundamental way. I think that those connections are at quite a deep level, in that Hamlet is deeply affected by what his mother's done, and by the character of his own father, who is portrayed in the play in the way in which other people talk about him. Old Hamlet, I'm referring to, of course, as immensely noble, honourable, wise, self-controlled, a very good king, a very good husband, a very good father. Young Hamlet is very aware of the quality of his father and the tragic and shocking defection from that, change from that sort of gold standard of honour in his own mother, and he's deeply disturbed by that. I mean, he is a very, very disturbed and troubled individual. So I think in that quite deep sense, yes, we can absolutely see a connection with what happens now.
Did I see someone else who wants to comment? Yes.
I had another connection with modern day, about how they said that Hamlet was so distracted and so distressed about the one issue with his mother and his father being killed, that he kind of ignored Ophelia, and he just kind of forgot that she was there and that she would be troubled by this too, and how oftentimes in modern day people do forget the feelings of others, and how they just kind of push away people when they themselves are being hurt. And I thought that went very well, especially with people who are having problems with any of alcoholism or anything like that, and how people can do the exact same thing that happened with Ophelia.
I think that's a really good point. Yes, I mean there is a tragedy of Ophelia, who's a young and sensitive girl who is shocked and saddened beyond anything she can deal with by Hamlet's apparent rejection and his apparent madness and disturbance. And she kills herself. And yes, I think that's very easy for us to empathise with.
To be self-centered to the
Yes,
point of
yes.
ruling out others.
Yes, yes. That's part of the tragedy of the play.
Yeah. Do we have someone else at this moment? Wendy, let me take you in another direction then. What's your reaction to the idea that the greater any work of art is, the more ambiguity it will sustain? First of all, I'm not sure what that may mean to you, but if you would think and talk about that a bit.
Yes, I think that certainly ambiguity, I think, is a good word. And also it's layers of meaning, isn't it? Layers of significance. And there's something quite paradoxical going on, because at any one moment, actually, it might be crystal clear. For example, when Hamlet says, to be or not to be, that is the question, then we understand very clearly that he's contemplating suicide, and that's what he's debating. Now, should I live or not live? What is the point? And that's what's going through my mind. But so at any individual moment, I think, in a great work of art, we might have absolute clarity and focus, and that's its genius at that moment. But within the whole thing, there may be immense richness and even conflicting or tangential lines of significance. And I think this is why we are still doing the plays after over 400 years. And there doesn't seem to be any end to the popularity and the interest in Shakespeare. As I've said, Hollywood is now mining Shakespeare and making very successful films, because there are so many different ways in which you can focus on them, what you can bring out. Kenneth Branagh's film of Much Ado, for instance, is, I think, a marvellous travelogue for Italy, apart from anything else, just absolutely makes me want to go to Tuscany on holiday. But the sort of joy and vitality and youthfulness of that is wonderful. And that's what you love about it. Now, you might see I've seen a stage show in Stratford some years ago with a much older Beatrice and Benedict, which was still very sparkling and witty, but you were so delighted that they got together in the end, because you thought there weren't going to be many other opportunities for them. And, in a way, the fact that they were, almost approaching middle age, or at least within our middle age, was also one of the sort of warm things in that interpretation. So I think that there are all kinds of ways in which we can make sense of the plays.
So when there is ambiguity, that's really a great invitation to a director and to actors to make choices.
Yes, absolutely. And I think it's that the rehearsal process is about. It's about exploring and then finally making choices. And that's what actors are doing. In Stratford, we have 8 weeks rehearsal normally for actors. And the designer and director and composer and the leading actors may well, in fact, they almost certainly will, have started having conversations much earlier than that. But then usually there's a block of 8 weeks rehearsal. Now, it doesn't take experienced actors all that long to actually learn their words. So what are they doing in those 8 weeks in rehearsal? Well, what they're doing is allowing the text to get inside them, and they inside the text, and they're trying it, they're letting it live, they're letting it breathe, to see which of all the layers of significance seem to come bubbling to the top. And often they'll explore different strands in their character and in the situation before it sort of crystallizes into the final performance that they're going to give. So the making of choices is very important.
One of the things I'd like us to do is to look at another clip, which is Alex Jennings again, playing Hamlet, doing the speech To Be or Not to Be, and ask you to help us understand how certain kinds of choices were made with regard to that. First, the very first thing is that when we see it, it's not going to be the traditional notion that many people have of Hamlet, looking like some Renaissance figure dressed in black leotard and standing on a parapet. Let's look at the clip, and then you help us perhaps understand some of the choices he made.
Sure.
Right.
To be or not to be? That is the question. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of troubles and by opposing end them. To die, to sleep. No more. And by a sleep, to say we end the heartache and the thousand natural shocks that flesh is heir to. 'Tis a consummation devoutly to be wished. To die, to sleep, to sleep. Perchance to dream, aye, there's the rub. For in that sleep of death, what dreams may come when we have shuffled off this mortal coil must give us pause. There's the respect that makes calamity of so long life. For who will bear the whips and scorns of time, the oppressor's wrong, the proud man's contumely, the pangs of disprized love, the law's delay, the insolence of office, or the spurns that patient merit of the unworthy takes, when he himself might his quietus make with a bare bodkin? Who would these fardels bear, to grunt and sweat under a weary life, but that the dread of something after death, the undiscovered country from whose bourne no traveller returns, puzzles the will, and makes us rather bear those ills we have than fly to others that we know not of. Thus, conscience does make cowards of us all. And thus the native hue of resolution is sicklied o'er with the pale cast of thought, and enterprises of great pitch and moment with disregard their currents turn awry and lose the name of action.
Wendy, how some of those choices there? That's not a typical way of doing that speech.
No, it's not. For me, it's very successful. I like it very much.
Excuse me, perhaps let's talk for a second about what might be a more typical way of doing the speech.
Yes. Well, actually, it is quite hard for us in Stratford to use the word typical, because every production is very different. But I suppose a kind of stock idea of Hamlet would be somebody, as you said, all dressed in black with a very big baggy white shirt, in either a rather gloomy sort of corridor with pillars behind or on a battlement. Saying that perhaps a bit like a purple passage, very conscious of it. For me, one of the qualities of Alex's delivery of that is that it seems to me so immediate that you believe, I believe, that he's really thinking that for the first time and he's putting it into words for himself for the first time.
What do you mean when you say purple?
Oh, I use that because I assume that was a phrase you use in the States, but maybe you don't.
Well, we do.
But you do. But a purple passage is a well-known, sort of beautiful passage of poetry. And I suppose a stock idea of Hamlet is that these soliloquies, which are so well-known, stand out and hit you. Oh, yes, fine, now we're getting a very well-known soliloquy. And that they're done almost like an aria in opera. Whereas I think what we're always trying to do in the RSC, what actors are always trying to do is those great moments that everybody knows should come in absolutely seamlessly, so that we suddenly think, oh yes, this is a well-known speech, but it's integrated into the whole performance and the thought processes of the actor. The great poetic moments should not strike us as great poetic moments, I think. They should strike us as completely natural expressions of thought and feeling at that point in the play. But I think there are several interesting things to say. First of all, of course, the gun, which as far as we know is the first time that this has ever been done. Well, because we wanted to set this in modern dress, it was modern because this isn't an old play. This is a play that's new now. It's being presented fresh for this time. There's no reason why it should be in an old setting. It's not a history play. It doesn't refer to well-known major world events in history. It's a story, really. It's a study. So why not modern dress? That's how we feel. And therefore, once you've made the decision that it is going to be in modern dress, Hamlet is obviously contemplating suicide. How would you kill yourself? Well, you'd either have a bottle of pills or you'd have a gun. And if you have a gun, then you have to have acquired that gun, and you can't sort of leave it under your pillow. You know, a servant might discover it. You've got to probably have it with you all the time. So Hamlet walks around with this brown paper bag, and at this point we discover what's in it. It's the murder weapon.
We've thought it's his lunch before this?
We thought it was his lunch, yes, or his homework or something. Yes, we have. So it does have very great impact in the theatre, and of course the problem about having shown the clip and talked about it is that anybody watching this programme going to see the show won't have that lovely shock. I'm sorry about that. So that, I think, just makes it very realistic. This is, he means business. But the other thing that's interesting for me is the actual setting. And in fact, it's a kind of attic. And you might have just glimpsed in the clip, behind there are piles of cases, and it's the stuff in a do you call it an attic or a lumber room?
Attic. And suitcases, we would say.
That's right, yes. Suitcases, hampers, and it's kind of Hamlet's den. There are several scenes in the play that are set in this attic. Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, who are apparently his friends, although they're set up by Claudius to get rid of Hamlet, but they find him eventually in the attic, and it's as if Hamlet has retreated in this big house, this castle, into a place where he will be safe, where nobody can find him, almost like a little boy again. Of course, he's not a little boy, he's a mature man, but somehow he's young in mind and thought and feeling. And it's almost like a little child who finds the top of the house to play and be safe and be secret. So it becomes a very important place which encapsulates and expresses Hamlet's pain, his isolation, and his plotting or his debating of what he's going to do. And I think that's an interesting and effective choice.
Going back to purple for a minute, not always, but a purple way of doing that passage would be to be very large, yes, or bombastic. And I think one of the things that's so interesting in this clip is how very quiet he is. It is as though he is speaking to each one of us in a very private way.
Yes. Yes, and of course soliloquies are from the actor to the audience. In Shakespeare's theatre, in the Globe in London, where Shakespeare's company of actors performed so many of these plays for many years, and that of course has been rebuilt now in London. You can go and sit in a modern version of the Globe. You understand how intimate the connection between the stage and the audience was. The audience is on three sides, and in tiers up, several rows of seats going up, so that nobody is very far from the actor or from the stage. So soliloquies were an intimate piece of communication, and I think Alex manages to achieve that very well. And I also believe both in his suffering and in the immediacy of what he's saying.
Right. I think we have some other questions or comments. Yes?
Yes, going back to Adam's question about the learning about Shakespeare in school. What do you think personally would be a good start off for the Shakespearean study, a good play to start off with?
I think it's successful, not in fact to immediately plunge into a whole play, but to look at moments in Shakespeare to understand something of the range. So, for instance, it's always fun to perhaps do a bit of comedy, one of the comedy scenes from A Midsummer Night's Dream, just to understand that there is wit and that there's physical comedy, and it actually can be funny, even though it's 400 years old. I think that it's good to look perhaps at some key speeches in a play like Henry V, which is asking big political questions. What does it mean to be a good leader? In this case, it's a good king, but it's the same thing. Maybe to look at some of the, again, quite small moments in Julius Caesar, where the senators, the leaders of the nation, are trying to decide what to do about Julius Caesar, who's become a tyrant. There is a great political moral debate going on. To look perhaps at a love scene, Romeo and Juliet, or As You Like It, so that in quite small moments students are understanding the range of the plays, and that they're about ideas and thoughts and feelings which can be relevant both to us as individuals and to the modern world. And I think you can have quite a fun introduction by looking at little moments like that. In a sense, you might say to introduce you to the world of Shakespeare. But after that, I think A Midsummer Night's Dream is a good one to do, or if you feel that for 14-year-olds perhaps the idea of fairies is a bit difficult to take, really, Twelfth Night is quite good. Macbeth is very good. Of course, it's a tragedy, it's a serious play, but it's very exciting, it's full of atmosphere, and it has very strong choices there. Again, a king is killed by somebody with a great thirst for power and ambition. And that's a strong motive, a strong idea to explore. That's often done very successfully.
Yes.
Because Shakespeare's plays have been performed so many times and they're so famous, do you think when an actor receives the role of Hamlet or Ophelia that they feel sort of intimidated by just the knowledge that so many people have performed these roles and the audience knows what to expect and sometimes has the lines memorized themselves? Do you think they're intimidated by that?
They are sometimes, yes. Actors sometimes say they are, especially in Stratford, where so many great actors have performed on that stage. But a lot of actors then also say that they try not to see films of it, not in fact to do research into previous performances, and to try and block out of their mind. If they, for instance, if Alex had seen the film by Laurence Olivier, then I'm sure that he would have tried to block that out, and he would not have deliberately gone to see the Branagh film. That's what most actors say. They try to just forget as far as they can. It's hard to do, but it is a pressure on actors, yes. It is something that they have to find their own way of dealing with.
Let's pursue that question a little bit in another way. Would you talk a little bit about what has happened for actors in this century with regard to Stanislavski's work, and how that has created actors who work with what in this country is very widely known as the method, as opposed to what is a more traditional standard way?
Yes, Stanislavski, as probably our audience will know very well, was a Russian director who directed all the early productions of Chekhov. And he was extremely interested in the process of acting and wrote about it, wrote theoretical work about it, and his influence was very great. And the Stanislavski way of approaching acting is looking very much for psychological realism, for the idea of psychological truth in performance. Actors spend a lot of time digging into their own psyche, into their own emotions, their own emotional memory, in order to try to find something which connects with what they recognize to be the psychological and emotional reality of the character. And they do that kind of quite detailed emotional research and construction, really, to create their performance. And that, I believe, is really the prevailing way in which actors are trained and work in America. And it's been very influential on film acting. And the method, which was the sort of American acceptance and development of Stanislavski into its own form, was produced great film stars like Marlon Brando, for instance, that kind of very relaxed, very concentrated detailed way of acting.
Dustin Hoffman, Robert De Niro.
Yes, Dustin Hoffman, that's right, yes. Now in England, there are actors who train in the Stanislavski Method and who love coming to America and working with your actors here. But there is also another way, particularly when you're working on text like Shakespeare, which is not naturalistic, which is not asking what did your character have for breakfast. It's much more focusing on how the language works and how you find the vocal energy and the concentration on the words to actually inhabit that language. So actors will do a lot of work on breathing, on that kind of visceral connection with the language, not concentrating on the inner life of the character. It's not that they completely ignore it, but not putting that in the forefront of what they do, but actually, how do you say this language? How do you feel the rhythm? And experimenting with it until they're feeling the pulse, the beat of the language and the rhythm of the verse through themselves and are reflecting that. It's a little bit difficult to explain, but maybe if you've got people who are acting themselves, they will begin to understand that.
Well, I think, do you know the story about Dustin Hoffman and Laurence Olivier?
Yes.
Tell people that story, because it's an illustration of what you're talking about.
It's marvellous. Well, there was a time when Laurence Olivier, our great sort of classical actor who'd done lots of Shakespeare, of course, was marvellous Shakespearean actor, was in a film with Dustin Hoffman. In fact, what film was it?
The Marathon Man.
The Marathon Man, thank you. Yes, I haven't actually seen it, but they were in rehearsal, and the story goes something like this, that Dustin Hoffman would do his own exercises to get ready for rehearsal, and before he came to the studio he would jog and he would meditate or he would do yoga, and then he would do whatever, all the other physical things that he needed, but then he would also do a lot of his own very inward looking psychological concentration exercises to get ready, but he still was finding it all very challenging. And he came to the studio one day and was explaining to Olivier, you know, Larry, this is what I do, and I've been up for 2 hours and I've been doing my concentration exercises, and I've really been sort of doing all this psychological detailed work on my couch, and I'm still finding it very difficult. What do? You know, what's your secret? What should I do? And Olivier is supposed to have said, try acting, dear boy. They say.
Just do it.
Just do it, you know. Just get in there and just be with that language, you know.
Excellent. Do we have other comments or questions from the group? Yes.
Do you think that people need to have a certain type of personality to be able to understand or enjoy Shakespeare, or can everybody get into it?
I think everybody can. And I think the enormous success of the Branagh films, and particularly now, of course, the new Romeo and Juliet with superstar Leonardo DiCaprio, and you know, I think that shows that has been an enormous success all around the world, with all kinds of people have gone to see that film. And that's partly because the film has found such a contemporary, vibrant way of expressing Romeo and Juliet. But I think, but that's also Shakespeare, you know, that is Shakespeare. And the director, Baz Luhrmann, worked with Peter Hall, the great British director who knows Shakespeare and the language and the, you know, the Elizabethan theatre so well. So he comes from really a classical background in order to make that film. And I think, therefore, the film itself is evidence that anybody can understand Shakespeare. Of course, if it's done in a way that is not precious, is not backward-looking, is an honest, fresh encounter with the play at that particular moment.
Do you think that Shakespeare would approve of Leonardo DiCaprio?
Well, I don't know that he'd approve of Leonardo DiCaprio, because I don't know. Yes, he probably would. He would approve, I think, because he's been successful. I think he would approve because he's communicated.
Because Shakespeare was a very savvy theatre person and businessman,
yeah,
right?
Absolutely. He made money. He was able to buy a very grand house in Stratford. He was a businessman, he ran the theatre, he was an actor himself. He was all about getting bums on seats. It's a crude phrase.
Bums on seats.
Do you not use that in the States?
We don't say bums.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Yes. Well, that's a crude
we
phrase.
Might say, politely we might say fannies.
Oh, right. Right, yeah. Well, you know, it's getting people there.
All right,
getting
all
people
right.
there. Perhaps that's a better way of putting it. But we often say that. And Shakespeare was about that, about getting an audience and keeping them happy and making sure they came back for the next show, because he had money invested in the Globe Theatre. So I think he would have been very pleased about the success of the film and the fact that Leonardo DiCaprio has charisma, and that excites people and people want to see him. And I think that he would have been very pleased with the fact that it's new and that people have found the way of communicating, because he did not write his plays in a little room and take his text to the publisher and get it published. He didn't do that. The fact that his plays were published is thanks to other people later, not Shakespeare. He was about putting them on the stage in front of an audience and communicating.
So a play isn't really a play until it's performed.
That is my view, and I think that was Shakespeare's view, indisputably, yes.
So it's fine, well and good for us to read the play, but we really should be seeing it.
We should be seeing it, we should be performing it. That's what we should be doing if we want to be true to Shakespeare.
In the theater, people use the expression sometimes, if it works, use it.
Yes.
So Shakespeare would agree with that.
I think so, yes, I think so. And we do know a certain amount about the Elizabethan theatre. We know that they loved quite lavish costume. We know that they used music. We know that there was, to some extent, setting and props. And all of those things are about making it vibrant, making it connect.
And we need to also remember that the plays were done in Elizabethan dress. They were not done historically. No. Nothing, indeed, was historically accurate, was it?
No, I mean, there's one illustration of a production where of a Roman play where one character has got a sort of what looks like a bit of a sheet round him. So it seems as if, and the knowledge we have of their costume, wardrobe, is that they wore basically Elizabethan dress with the odd thing added, so perhaps a laurel wreath and a bit of a sheet to look like a Roman toga for the Roman plays, some armour for the history plays. But you're absolutely right. Basically what would have been for them modern dress.
Excellent, excellent. Wendy, what is one last thought you would offer all of us who may be going to see Hamlet? What is it that you would want us to go out with?
I would want you to be open-minded when you went to see the play. I would want you to be free to make those connections with your own life, really.
Thank you, Wendy. That's very helpful. And thank you for coming today and helping us to understand something about Shakespeare's productions and particularly about Hamlet.
Thank you,
Thank
Jack.
you very much. And thank you here at Hylton High School for being here and participating. This is the final program in the Performing Arts series for this season. And the Prince William Network and the Kennedy Center want to thank all of you who have watched. We hope that you've enjoyed the programs. Planning is already underway for a new exciting series for the next school year. You can keep in touch and learn more about next year's series by visiting the Arts Edge website at the address on your screen. Until next time, make your lives richer by making the arts part of your life every day. And so we can talk with people in the audience if we like, if they want to talk to us. Do you all have any other kinds of comments or questions you want to raise with